I remember thinking that the greatest horror of homelessness was the cold. That autumn, the first winds made me shiver, forcing me to recognize how vulnerable my thin body was. But after years of living under this sky, I understood that the cold was merely a tool. The real killer was human apathy and the decay of the soul when confronted with true hunger. When I first hit the streets, I was naive. I tried to find a decent job, but in the depths of that economic recession, employment was a luxury few could afford. I quickly became exhausted, my ribs started showing, and I struggled to keep my eyes open due to lack of energy. I tried everything to survive, standing and begging on busy streets, but most people were too consumed by their own lives to help a homeless person. I moved to residential neighborhoods where I received more looks of contempt and fear than assistance. For the first few months, I subsisted on false hope, but only one reality mattered: the hunger. There were days I couldn't even scrape together enough change to buy a cheap hot dog. The craving for food was so intense it overshadowed all reason. It was a November night and I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was curled up in an alley covered in scraps of cardboard. I thought about a fellow homeless man, David. He was a good man, sober and free of addiction. I always believed David was just a phone call away from a family member or a job interview away from freedom. But then he vanished. I understood that in this environment, even the most resilient could be taken by something as senseless as the weather. The fear of death enveloped me, the chilling sense that mortality was stalking my heels. In my desperation, I overheard a rumor. Another homeless man, strangely well-fed and cheerful, told me about a buffet. He claimed there was an old man, a skinhead, who regularly distributed food to the homeless on the edge of the woods. Beneath a drain, starvation had fried my brain. I followed the directions. I waited until twilight. I walked 2 blocks west toward the edge of the woods. I found the loose manhole cover across the street. It took every ounce of my remaining strength to lift it, and then I descended the old iron ladder. The oppressive, nauseating stench of the sewer immediately assaulted my nostrils, but I didn't hesitate. I was too hungry to turn back. I dragged the cover back into place, plunging myself into the musky darkness. My feet sank into the filthy sewage water. I found the lighter in my pocket and lit it for guidance. The thick stench immediately hit me again. I saw large, clear words scrawled on the tunnel wall in a dripping red ink, which looked suspiciously like dried blood. Buffet, followed by an arrow pointing forward. I was in the right place. As I mumbled to myself, my voice echoed, stirring up creatures living below. I heard the scurrying and squeaking of rats. They were colossal in size. I had heard monstrous stories about them, but I lacked the mental fortitude to distinguish what mattered. The ravenous hunger was torturing my mind. I kept going. I must have trudged painfully for about half a mile through the putrid sewer filth. The further I went, the more red-painted signs I saw, all directing me to the buffet. Then I heard sounds. People eating. It sounded like animals grunting, chewing loudly and snapping their teeth. I had never heard such loud chewing, and even in the sewer the sound made my stomach rumble. I tried to quicken my pace, but my exhausted body forced me to maintain a slow, steady rhythm. Finally, I reached an intersection in the tunnel. Just then, my lighter ran out of power. Everything went dark. I still heard the sound of the banquet getting louder. As I prepared to turn the corner, I heard a sharp snap like a bone breaking in half. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried desperately not to disturb the sewage water. In the faint light leaking from around the bend, I saw the water where I stood was a dark, murky red. I crept up to the intersection and cautiously peered around the corner. Over the stagnant drain of a clogged sewer, 6 or 7 shirtless vagrants were sitting around the floating corpse of a man. They were devouring him. They ripped skin from flesh, flesh from bone, breaking the bones and sucking out the marrow. I watched them crack open the skull, pulling out the brain and chewing the crimson matter, tendons caught between their teeth. What horrified me the most was recognizing the cheap suit lying nearby. I had seen that bastard just a few hours earlier. He was the jerk in the cheap suit who had snatched my cup on the street, sending all my coins flying into the gutter and cursing me as a shameless bum. These deranged savages had killed him and dragged his body down here. My entire body filled with terror. I turned and ran. I ran as fast as my battered body allowed. I was on the verge of starvation, yet I would have rather died than become one of those cannibalistic beasts, devoid of all humanity. These men were a living reflection of the havoc that hunger can wreak on a person's mind. I raced back through the tunnel, ignoring the stench and the rats. I climbed the ladder using the strength of sheer panic to push the manhole cover aside. I escaped and ran into the night, running until I was utterly exhausted and retching. I collapsed under a row of trees, shaking not from the cold but from disgust. After that horrifying night, my perception of life shifted. I understood that the greatest fear was not starving to death, but transforming into something worse than death. I had witnessed raw brutality. I knew that if I stayed, I would either become the next prey for those who hunted the homeless, or be devoured by my own desperate peers. I began seeking out more clandestine hiding spots. I recalled what I had learned: to trust no one's good intentions and to always be alert. Seeking potential escape routes in every situation, I decided I had to act. The next morning, around 8 a.m., I went to the public library. I started reading the news, not looking for a job, but for information regarding disappearances or unusual deaths. I read about a series of murders targeting the homeless in Orange County. The victims were all vagrants, stabbed multiple times, one nearly 60 times. The attacks seemed random. The killer was a new stealth predator. He had attacked a 53-year-old homeless man in a shopping mall parking lot, then a 42-year-old man under the Santa Ana River Bridge, and finally, a 57-year-old whose body was left in a public library parking lot. This new fear permeated my bones. We were not just fighting hunger and cold, but fighting predators who saw us as easy targets. I started isolating myself. I knew that cowardice could cost me dearly, but I also knew courage could lead to me lying on the pavement with my face smashed under a boot. I remembered the warning of the old man who advised a stubborn teenager to go home. "You're not ready for this life." Was I ready? No, but I was forced to adapt. I searched for an inconspicuous, secluded shelter. I thought about having to climb down into the sewers. I began scouting abandoned industrial areas, old structures. I needed a place where, if something went wrong, I could find an escape route. I found an old, dilapidated warehouse, rarely frequented. The back door was broken, and I marked it as my potential escape. I gathered cardboard and old blankets. This would be my sleeping area. I trusted no one. I didn't seek a group. I had seen what people do to each other when they are hungry and intoxicated. My first night in the new warehouse, I woke up around 1 a.m. I heard the main door creak open. I held my breath. I had constructed a flimsy screen using old wooden crates. I could see the shadows of two men cast on the dusty warehouse floor. They were talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but their voices were serious, almost angry. One of them stopped right in front of my hiding spot. I could smell strong alcohol, but that wasn't the most terrifying scent. The terrifying scent was the smell of bad intent. They started rummaging. I lay still, trying to stay calm, executing my survival plan. Plan A was to run. I had a slight advantage. They didn't know exactly where I was. The nearest man lightly pushed one of the wooden crates. It tilted toward me. I knew I couldn't hide any longer. He said, "Hey, did you see anyone here?" The other man responded. I realized they were looking for something, perhaps someone who had stolen their property, or maybe a victim. Either way, I knew this would end in violence. Just as the nearest man reached out to sweep away the final layer of cardboard, I bolted upright. I didn't intend to fight. I used all the pent-up strength fueled by hunger and fear to sprint toward the back door. I ran full speed. I heard them shouting behind me, but they were caught off guard. I burst through the broken back door, running straight into the dark alley. I ran without stopping, without looking back. I didn't know if they were pursuing me, but I didn't dare check. I had to create chaos to save myself. I ran to a residential area and started banging on doors. I knew this was dangerous, but I needed witnesses. I hammered hard on one door, then another. Finally, a man opened an upstairs window and shouted. I didn't stop. I kept running past that area and deeper into the city. I was safe. That night, I didn't sleep in the warehouse. I slept in a park where there was more foot traffic. I accepted the cold, but I refused to be prey in the darkness. The next morning, as the sun rose, I walked. I had survived. I understood that in this world of homelessness, existence is a solitary, continuous, and haunting act. I was still plagued by what I had witnessed under the sewer, and the terror of becoming another victim of the hidden hunters. I had learned one crucial lesson. No one is trustworthy, and the only path to survival is maximum vigilance and the necessary self-preservation to protect myself. Fear had saved my life, and although guilt and disgust still haunted me, at least I was alive. I used to believe that those who slept on the street slowly faded from this world, melting away like the morning mist. Now I know not everyone disappears. Some people are still there. It's just that no one wants to see them anymore. I started wandering in Easton, a desolate industrial town in northern Pennsylvania. After the steel mill shut down, the city was hollowed out. I lost my job, my home, and in the end I only had a backpack, torn shoes, and the habit of counting the sidewalk tiles to keep my mind from falling apart. I slept in the park for a few nights, then got chased away. An old homeless man named Marvin showed me a spot under the bridge near the Delaware River. "It's quiet there, no police, not many people go looking," he said, his voice husky with cigarette smoke. I followed him and stayed there for almost half a year. Under that bridge was a world of its own, one no one in town wanted to mention. Tattered blankets, piles of beer cans, cardboard boxes pieced together into walls. Each person had their own space marked by something, an old shoe, a wooden sign, or simply a warning glare. Anyone who stepped into another's space without permission was either beaten or vanished. I set up my sleeping spot close to the concrete wall. During the day, I wandered around the bus station, begged for money, or scavenged for food in the trash bins behind restaurants. At night, I lay there, looking at the yellow light reflecting from above the bridge, thinking about the people sleeping in warm houses, wondering if they knew that just a few meters away, another world was slowly rotting. Marvin was the only one who spoke to me. He said there was a time when it was more crowded under the bridge and over a dozen people until it started. When I asked what it was, he just laughed, the toothless kind of laugh, and then said, "When you hear someone moving around at night, never look." I thought he was just trying to scare the newcomer. The first week, I actually heard footsteps, uneven, slow, moving through everyone's sleeping area. I held my position, eyes closed, heart pounding. When morning came, I saw a trash can overturned and a man named Willis's bag of belongings was gone. People said he had left. Marvin just nodded, saying nothing. In the following days, I started noticing someone living at the far end of the bridge, where the wall crumbled, near the abandoned railway tracks. No one dared to go near there. Occasionally, I saw plastic bags hanging on a steel wire, with spoiled food and random junk inside, as if someone was hoarding something or marking their territory. One night, when I returned late after wandering around the market, I saw Marvin standing, staring toward the end of the bridge, his eyes empty. I asked him what he was looking at. He just said, "You should pack your things. This place isn't going to be safe anymore." I gave a weak laugh, thinking he was paranoid. I was already so familiar with death. What was more terrifying than this prolonged existence? But just 2 nights later, Marvin disappeared. His blanket was still there, but his backpack was empty, torn open. I walked around the bridge, calling out softly a few times. No answer. The others didn't even bother to ask. Here, people vanishing was normal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat leaning against the wall, looking up at the bridge deck. It was cold, my breath dissolving into the air. Then I heard something very faint. Not footsteps, but like fabric scraping against concrete. I held my breath, trying to distinguish the direction it was coming from. From the end of the bridge, I shone my small flashlight, the weak beam skimming over the concrete pillars, and stopped at something that sent a chill down my spine. A piece of jacket, stained and muddy, was being slowly dragged across the floor. Behind it was a shadow hunched over, neither exactly crawling nor walking. I turned off the light, backed away, my heart racing. The next morning I left the bridge, intending not to return. But hunger dragged me back. I needed a place to sleep, even for a few hours. I told myself it was just some drunk or crazy person. The next night I heard the rustling sound again, closer. I lay still, gripping the apple-peeling knife in my hand. A dark shape glided past the outside of my blanket. I was sure it stopped and looked at me. I didn't move. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps retreated. I decided to investigate. The next day, I hid myself at the corner of the bridge, waiting for twilight. From the distance, a man appeared, hunched over, wearing clothes that were too big, his head covered by a dirty hoodie. He was pulling a supermarket shopping cart. Inside were black trash bags and some metal objects. He walked straight to the corner of the bridge where Marvin had warned me not to go. I followed. When he turned past the sheet of corrugated metal covering an opening, the stench wafted out. I held back my vomit. Behind the metal was a small gap like a self-dug cellar. Inside were 3 large plastic bags tightly tied, but one was ripped at the mouth. What was inside was unmistakable. A piece of cloth stained red and a human hand withered as if left for a long time. I backed away, trying not to make a sound. But a shard of glass under my foot shattered. He turned back. In that moment, I clearly saw his face. High cheekbones, deeply sunken eyes, a beard smeared with dried blood. He didn't scream, just looked at me, his gaze as devoid of emotion as if looking at another bag of trash. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, only stopping when I fell onto the dirt patch near the bus station. The next morning, I returned with 2 others, but the corner of the bridge was empty. No corrugated metal, no bags. Only a few streaks of dried blood and the tracks of a shopping cart wheel. I thought about calling the police, but then remembered that to them, I was just a smelly homeless guy, and no one would listen to me. I kept silent. The others kept silent too. Here everyone had a dirty past, and everyone was afraid of being dragged down. I continued living under the bridge, trying to forget about it. But a few weeks later, a newcomer arrived. A young man around 20 who had just lost his job. He pitched his tent near my spot. I wanted to warn him, but then stopped myself. He was enthusiastic, saying he was only staying for a few days. One evening, I saw the beam of a flashlight from the end of the bridge. This time, I didn't look away. I saw him, the one pulling the shopping cart, standing and saying something to the young man pointing toward the cellar. The young man hesitated, then followed. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No one returned. I couldn't sleep. Early in the morning, I walked toward that spot. The cellar was empty. The young man had vanished, only his backpack and shoes remained. I found a long drag mark on the ground, leading out to the riverbank. The drag mark stopped there. I left the bridge again, this time for good. I went to the clinic, asked for a shower, and then went to the public library. There I read the local newspaper. A small article was at the bottom of the page. Fragment of a body found floating in the Delaware River, suspected to be that of a homeless person. Police are investigating. No one came to identify it. I knew it was him. I moved to an abandoned building on the west side of the city. At night, I slept little because every time I closed my eyes, I remembered his expressionless gaze. I knew he was still out there somewhere, still pulling the shopping cart along bridges through parks looking for newcomers. No one called the police, no one cared. Sometimes I think he exists as a natural part of this world, like sickness, like poverty, something no one can eradicate. Months later, I saw him again. I was collecting cans near an old parking lot when I spotted the familiar shopping cart. I didn't intend to get closer, but he saw me first. He smiled, the kind of smile that recognized someone from a long time ago. I turned my back and walked away, but he called after me, "You're still alive?" His voice was hoarse, rasping through his dry throat. I didn't answer. I just walked faster, but he didn't follow. When I looked back, he had vanished with the shopping cart. Since that day, I've never slept in the same place for more than 3 nights. I avoid bridges, avoid the darkness, avoid anyone pulling an old shopping cart. Every time I see someone missing, I know he found someone else. Now I live thanks to a social reintegration program. I have a small room, a clean bed, regular meals. People tell me I should write down my life story to heal. I try to write, and realize my hands still shake every time I think of the smell under that bridge years ago. Sometimes at night when I look out the window, I imagine I see a shadow of a person pushing a cart across the street under the dim lamplight. He doesn't turn back, just walks slowly as if looking for someone else. I tell myself it's just an illusion, that he can't possibly know where I am, but I still lock the door every night, check the lock twice, and always keep the small knife under my pillow. Not because I'm afraid he will come back, but because I know, in this world, he's not the only one who chooses to survive this way. I don't know how long it had been since I last slept on a real bed. The life of a homeless man in this big city doesn't allow for such luxuries. My home was a small, well-shielded spot beneath the base of an abandoned highway overpass, on the edge of the run-down industrial district. It wasn't an ideal place, but at least it was quiet and almost completely forgotten. It was a cold October night. No snow, but the biting chill seeped deep into my layers of dirty clothing. I had erected a temporary barrier using cardboard and an old tarp, creating an enclosed space just enough to trap body heat. Around 11 p.m., I started settling in for the night. Everything around me was unnervingly silent. No traffic, no passersby, no lights on, complete stillness. I was too familiar with this quiet, and usually it brought a strange sense of security. But tonight the silence felt different, as if something was suspended in the air that I hadn't felt before. My chest felt unusually tight. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just exhaustion and the perpetual fear of being alone at night on empty streets. I closed my eyes. Around 1 a.m., a small noise woke me up. It wasn't the sound of the wind or an animal. It was a deliberate sound, the crunch of shoes on the gravel not far away. I held my breath and listened. My heart hammered against my ribs. Most people were asleep by this hour, and anyone moving in this zone had their reasons. The footsteps stopped. I lay still, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. This area had no streetlights, so the shadows were thick. I could only make out the outline of my tarp. I thought maybe it was just another homeless person looking for a spot, but my instincts told me otherwise. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. I gently pulled back the tarp covering, just a small crack enough to peer out. It took me a moment to realize. There, standing about 5 meters from my shelter, was a figure. The person was tall, wearing a bulky coat and a hood, but the most chilling thing was that they weren't doing anything. They just stood still, completely motionless, as if they knew I had seen them but didn't care. No movements, no indication they were searching for something or just passing through. They simply stood there, directly facing my makeshift sanctuary in absolute silence. The terror began to mount. The coincidence of this person choosing to stop in the middle of the night on this forgotten stretch of road, right in front of where I slept, seemed impossible. I tried not to panic, but it was unavoidable. I thought about running. But run where? This was the city. I had nowhere to go, and I couldn't abandon the few belongings I owned. I waited. About 10 minutes passed. The figure remained. The more I looked, the more I noticed something strange. Faint light spilling from the distant warehouse district highlighted something they were holding. I realized they were carrying something. It looked like a large, heavy bag or possibly a tool. The figure started to move. Very slowly, they took a small step toward me, then a second step. The knot in my throat was instantaneous. I no longer believed this was a coincidence. I was certain they were there for me. They stopped right next to the cardboard tarp, mere inches from me. I could feel their presence. I could hear their heavy, ragged breathing, as if they had been running or struggling with something. My cardboard barrier was not a securely locked door. It was just a flimsy cover. If this person wanted in, they would get in. After a few terrifying seconds of silence, the figure whispered a sentence, the voice rough and garbled. "I know you're here." My heart felt like it stopped. They knew me, or at least they knew someone was here. The fact that nothing had been disturbed or stolen in the area could only mean the intruder was actually targeting me. I didn't answer. I didn't dare move. Then the person started pushing. The cardboard door began to move. It made a weak scraping sound as it was forced inward. Though I tried to hold it back, it was useless. My concealment was broken. A cold dread hit me as I realized I was completely exposed. I saw a pair of eyes. Just past the pile of old clothes and the torn tarp, a pair of eyes stared at me from the darkness. They were wide, vacant, and filled with a look of pure madness. It was a human face, but so close that I couldn't make out the details, only the sheer horror. In a reflexive action, I curled up and sprung to my feet. Without thinking, instinct screamed at me to flee immediately. I kicked aside the cardboard pile and burst out of the shelter. I ran at full speed toward the main road, not daring to look back. I dashed through the darkness, panic flooding my body. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps running in pursuit. I ran down the dark alley. This was the industrial zone. There were no houses or neighbors to call out to. I had to rely on my legs and my knowledge of the terrain. I turned onto a smaller street. This street was usually used by trucks during the day, but tonight it was empty. I heard the footsteps stop. I thought I had lost him, but then I heard another sound. The sound of a car engine. A car began accelerating onto the street I had just turned down. Its headlights suddenly illuminated the road, reflecting off the wet pavement. I glanced over my shoulder. It wasn't a police car. It was an old dark sedan speeding straight toward me. The horrifying thing was that I recognized it. I had seen this car before. It had been parked a few blocks from my area for the past few days. I had assumed it was some kind of night shift worker, but now I knew better. That car had been waiting. I ran faster, but a car is always faster than a pedestrian. I bolted into a large, abandoned parking lot. In the middle of the lot was a row of low trees and thick bushes. It was a path I usually avoided because it was too dark and unlit. But right now, the darkness was my only ally. I thought that if I wanted to survive, it might be better to take the path through the trees and get away from the speeding car, which clearly had no good intentions. The car abruptly braked at the edge of the parking lot, headlights blazing. It stopped right at the entrance to the bushy area. It was as if it knew exactly where I was going, as if it was waiting for me in the worst possible place to corner me. I froze, barely breathing. Through the windshield, I clearly saw there was no one inside the car. It was empty. Sheer terror raised the hair on my neck. Just then, a dark shadow emerged from the darkness behind the car. It was the man who had broken into my shelter. He seemed to be watching me, clearly aware that I planned to escape through the tree path. Without another thought, I ran the opposite way. I sprinted across the parking lot toward a small residential neighborhood, hoping for light and other people. I heard heavy footsteps running after me, followed by a loud car door slam and the engine starting to roar, accelerating toward me. I screamed for help. Although I knew it was unlikely anyone would hear me in this industrial area, I screamed anyway. The car was closing in. I could hear the tires screeching on the asphalt. I darted past a damaged public telephone booth, hoping it would momentarily obstruct his view. I kept running until I reached the streets with actual houses. Perhaps my screaming had worked, or perhaps running into the residential area scared him off. Just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I looked back. The car had turned around. It was no longer pursuing me. It disappeared from sight, melting back into the street's darkness. I didn't stop until I felt truly safe. I collapsed at the nearest bus stop where a faint light shone from an advertisement board. I slumped down, gasping for air. I had escaped. I called the police, recounting everything, from the appearance of the stranger to the suspicious parking of the car. They took my statement, but like most similar incidents, it was hard to find anyone, let alone arrest them, with only a vague description of a car and a shadowy figure. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted from me. Perhaps he was a psychopath stalking me or simply looking for an easy victim, but the fact that he could break into my shelter and then disappear without a trace made everything terrifying. That night, I didn't dare return to my spot. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in another bus shelter, one with more passers-by. Although I survived, everything changed after that night. The feeling of insecurity and the fear that I am never truly alone never left me. Now every time I pass any dark corner, I look around more carefully. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened. I still have to live on the streets, but I changed my spot. I never dare walk alone on deserted streets at night anymore. I am always vigilant. Sometimes I still wonder, if I hadn't decided to run immediately, would I still be here to tell this story? I hope anyone reading this is extremely careful about these things, because sometimes a small decision and a warning instinct are all it takes to prevent a tragedy. I don't know if he is still out there, but I think he is. I am still haunted by the feeling that something very, very bad was about to happen to me. I am the storyteller, and this is the tale that has haunted me for years, a harsh lesson in survival amidst the bone-chilling cold of this city. Life on the streets is not a series of journeys seeking kindness. It is a relentless war against invisibility and predators. This city by darkness is a cold and callous body. I have lived here long enough to know every gap, every shadow where I can hide from the world's notice. More than anything else, the cold is the most persistent enemy. Deep into November, the temperature had plummeted, forcing me to seek out stronger shelters than temporary awnings. I chose an abandoned industrial area, a labyrinth of derelict warehouses and rusted pipes far from the city center, where the streetlights never reached. My refuge was a maintenance tunnel beneath an old steel foundry. The entrance was concealed behind a pile of broken concrete and shielded by a ragged tarp. Inside, the air was still and dry, retaining some residual warmth from the day. I had set up the spot carefully, using only a single wool blanket and a torn sleeping bag I'd found months ago. That was my existence, simple, dark, and above all quiet. For the first few weeks, everything followed a tedious schedule. I left the shelter before sunrise, walking about a mile to the dumpster area of a bakery where I could scavenge edible stale bread. During the day, I stayed hidden, conserving energy and keeping clear of police patrols or aggressive groups of other displaced people. I returned to the tunnel when the late darkness had fully set in. But this quiet did not last. A couple of weeks prior, a man named Carl had disappeared. Carl was the only other person I interacted with in this area. He was always cautious, never caused trouble, and lived in an old train car near the main tracks. I didn't think much of his vanishing. Perhaps he moved on to another city, or worse, succumbed to the harsh cold. I had seen far worse things. However, late one night as I was returning to my hideout, I noticed something different. Next to the heap of rubbish near Warehouse 3, where I usually stopped to check for discards, there was a strange odor. It wasn't the familiar stench of garbage or sewage. It was a strong chemical smell, like industrial bleach or a potent disinfectant. This smell was attempting to mask something else, a metallic coppery smell I recognized immediately, the smell of blood. A sense of alarm squeezed my gut. I had survived on instinct, and my instinct told me this was no ordinary accident. I looked around. The silence of the industrial park became heavy and terrifying, no longer peaceful. I quickly retreated into the shadows. When I reached the entrance to the tunnel, I had to be doubly careful. I crawled past the tarp, slid down the concrete steps, and secured the rusty metal door with the chain and padlock I had meticulously installed. I sat in the darkness, my hand clutching the small knife I always carried. It wasn't a strong weapon, but it was my only defense. The next morning, I decided against going out for food. I had half a can of cold beans left. Survival was more important than hunger. I lay still, listening. The whole day passed without a sound except for the wind whistling through the vents above. As night approached, I no longer felt safe. The sensation of being watched, an invisible pressure in the air, weighed heavily on me. Carl had vanished without a trace, and there was that chemical smell. Later that evening, I heard a sound. Not footsteps. It was the sound of an engine. In this abandoned area, that was highly unusual. This sector had no paved roads, only gravel and mud. The sound was a small truck engine, slow and cautious. It stopped near the entrance to Warehouse 3. I held my breath. Through a tiny gap near the tunnel ceiling, I could only see a patch of ash-gray night sky. Then I heard the sound of the truck door closing, followed by footsteps. Not the wandering gait of the homeless, but purposeful, heavy steps of boots. There were at least 2 people. They didn't talk. There were no greetings or drunken curses, just deadly silence and the sounds of organized activity. I heard metal clanging against metal, perhaps them opening the back of the truck, then the sound of them dragging something heavy across the gravel foundation. I estimated they were only about 50 yards from me. A few minutes later, silence returned. I waited, my body tense to the point of pain. Then the footsteps resumed, this time heading toward me, sweeping the area. I recalled a story I once heard on the street. A group, they called them the Cleaners. They weren't police, nor were they local gangs. They were hunters targeting the homeless. Their goal wasn't money or possessions. They simply wanted to erase our presence from certain areas. Some said they were members of a brutal cult. Others that they were organ traffickers, but the only thing everyone agreed upon was that those who disappeared after encountering them were never found. I had to get out of here. Staying meant being buried. I crawled to the corner of the tunnel where a small drainage pipe led out to the exterior of the foundry grounds. It was too small for me to slide through easily, but it was my only hope. The footsteps were closer now. They were entering the derelict area surrounding my position. A deep, cold voice spoke. He didn't shout, but the sound was clear enough for me to hear through the vent. This place is sealed. Check underneath. Someone's been living here. He knew. He had found signs of my presence. I acted immediately. I used the knife to pry off the protective grate over the drain opening. The foul smell of mud and sewage assaulted my nose, but I didn't care. Above me, the footsteps stopped right over the tunnel. Then came a strong scratching sound on the tarp. There's an entrance here. It's locked. He tried the door handle, shaking it violently. The rusty chain and padlock rattled. I slid my feet into the pipe. Cold mud coated my ankles. I had to lie flat on my stomach, using my elbows and knees to push myself forward. A terrible noise erupted. They were using a crowbar or something similar to force the door open. I knew I only had seconds left. I closed my eyes and pushed with all my might. My skin scraped against the sharp, rusted metal edges of the pipe. I felt a deep cut on my shoulder, but the pain was just motivation. The door above burst open. The sound of tearing metal echoed throughout the tunnel. "He's not here!" The voice sounded surprised. "Check the drain pipe!" The deeper voice commanded. I had traveled about 10 feet. Just a few more feet and I would be out of the concrete area. Suddenly, a powerful light beam pierced the tunnel, blinding me. The flashlight was intense like the sun, and I could feel its heat. I heard hurried footsteps rushing toward the entrance. "He's in the sewer pipe." A large shadow blocked most of the drain opening. I tried to push faster, but my body was stuck. "Come out. If you cooperate, this will be easier." The voice was chillingly calm, devoid of anger or panic. I didn't respond. Cooperation meant an anonymous death. I kicked hard against the concrete wall of the pipe to generate momentum. My old jacket tore completely. The sound behind me was closer. I felt the rush of displaced air as he tried to jam his arm inside. "Hurry up, we don't have much time," the other voice urged. I felt a powerful hand grip my ankle. It was thick-gloved, cold, and unyielding. In desperation, I tried to use the knife, but my hand couldn't maneuver in the tight space. I had one choice: abandon the shoe. I struggled, pulling my foot so violently that I felt my muscles tear. The hand gripped my old boot tightly. I pulled with all my remaining strength, finally freeing my foot from the boot. I heard a thump as the boot was yanked away. The hand lost its leverage. I slid out of the pipe, falling onto the damp weeds outside the industrial fence. I lay there for a second, my body shaking from the cold and the tension. Behind me, I heard a small shout and a loud crash. Perhaps one of them had fallen. I didn't stop to look. I ran. I ran through the sparse woodland separating the industrial zone from the interstate highway. Running without shoes on my feet was torture. Every step was a small laceration from sharp stones and branches. But fear had turned into pure adrenaline, overriding all other sensation. I don't know how long I ran, perhaps 10 minutes, until my lungs felt like they would burst and I collapsed beneath a large oak tree near the final barbed wire fence. I listened. No truck sounds, no pursuing footsteps. Only my own ragged breathing and the wind. I crawled under the fence, dragging my aching body onto a deserted dirt road. I knew I couldn't stay here. They would return. They would search the entire area. I limped, trying to maintain a steady pace even though my feet were numb and bleeding. I needed to get back to the city, to merge into the safe chaos of the crowded areas. I walked like this for several hours. I didn't dare use the main roads, afraid of being spotted. I passed through dark alleys and sleeping suburban neighborhoods. When I finally reached the area beneath an old overpass where the faint city lights shone down, it was the early hours before dawn. I found a pile of discarded cardboard. I sat down, using these pieces to wrap my feet, trying to slow the heat loss. The pain began to set in. My throat was parched. I knew I had survived, but the cost was the permanent loss of the only safe haven I possessed. That tunnel was compromised now. I didn't sleep. I just sat there staring into the darkness, trying to analyze every detail of what had occurred. Their professionalism, their silence, and their methodical actions. They weren't petty criminals. They were hunters. Carl hadn't moved on. Carl had been cleaned. The sun began to rise, painting the cold gray horizon a dirty pink. I was still alive. I had escaped the trap they had set, but I knew that in this city, there is no ultimate victory for people like me, only small reprieves. I stood up, my feet throbbing. I had to find another place, another tunnel, another secret, and I had to always carry that knife because I had learned that the real horrors never come from ghosts or devils. They come from other people. Those who decide your life has no value and who are ready to use bleach to erase your traces as if you were merely a stain on the ground. I walked away, merging with the flow of early morning commuters. Once again, I became an invisible shadow, but this time, I carried the sharp fear and the experience of survival from a horrific night. A night without miracles, only pure brutality and a desperate flight. I survived, and that is all that matters. I am Elias. I once had an apartment in the suburbs, a steady job, and a life most people would consider normal. But that is the past. Now the sidewalk is my home and the night sky is the ceiling. Life on the streets in this city teaches you one thing. Loneliness isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is becoming invisible and then suddenly being noticed by predators. It had been 3 months since I lost my job and couldn't afford rent. The first days were terrible, but the human body has an amazing capacity to adapt. I found temporary shelter in an abandoned warehouse district near the river, where the terrible stench of decomposing garbage clung to everything. It was cold that night, a thin fog covering the deserted streets. Hours past midnight, I woke up. The chilling cold and hunger were familiar companions, but this time the feeling was different. The excessive silence of the area disturbed me. I usually heard truck noises or police sirens, but tonight there was only a terrifying stillness. I lay curled up in my thin blanket, trying not to move. I remembered the times I had been naive, thinking the worst that could happen was rejection. I was wrong. The worst thing is realizing that your life holds no value to others. A foul smell stung my nostrils, a disgusting mixture of bleach and something else, something rotten. It was so strong it made me nauseous, and I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was imagining things. I knew that in these areas foul odors were common, but this smell was strange, chemical, and heavy. I decided to check it out. Curiosity, I knew, could be costly. I had learned that from my own experiences. But something in my survival instinct told me that this silence and this strange smell were not coincidences. I crept past rusted containers and piles of debris. The only light came from a flickering street lamp at the end of the alley, casting long, distorted shadows. Finally, I reached a hidden corner where the smell of detergent was strongest. It was an old warehouse, the metal door slightly ajar. My heart began to pound. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air around me was thick and sour. I looked inside. The room was pitch black, but the faint light from outside was enough for me to see the floor was sticky and cold. There were dark stains like mold, deeply soaked into the wood. I whispered, "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. I reassured myself. Maybe it was just an abandoned drug lab. But then I saw a small black camera with a blinking red light placed at the corner of the door, pointing straight at me. I froze. My entire body locked up. I was not a guest. I was a target under surveillance. I backed away, trying not to make any sound. The fear was so intense that I couldn't breathe normally. I tried to find a safe exit, but every nearby door seemed to be locked from the outside, as if the place was under total surveillance. I quickly realized this place was a trap. Homeless people are easy targets. We disappear without anyone asking questions. I ran towards the entrance I had used, but it was locked. Panic surged through my body. I started pounding on the metal door, but it wouldn't budge. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I had to find another way. I ran back deeper into the warehouse area. I knew that if there were cameras, there must be a control center somewhere. I had to destroy it. I found an old wooden staircase. It creaked as I went up. I knew I was making noise, but I had no choice. On the second floor, I saw a door slightly open. Inside, a faint beam of light escaped. I stood on the threshold. This was the control room. There were at least 6 monitors, all showing blurry images, looking like they were shot with old security cameras. Most screens showed people in different rooms. Some were tied up, some lay motionless. The sight made my stomach turn. I recognized some faces. They were other homeless people I had met at the public shelter. And then, on one of the screens, I saw myself in real time, standing right in front of the door. They were watching me. I felt like I was in some kind of perverse entertainment show being broadcast live. I searched for the source of the sound, a slight hum as if a giant server was nearby. I found it. It was in the corner of the room, a large server cabinet. I grabbed a nearby stool and started smashing the equipment. It was useless. Every time I disconnected a cable, another screen from a different room lit up. The tension in my body increased with every passing second. Then, I saw an image on a screen that froze me completely. A large safe door was slowly opening. A figure emerged. He held a knife in one hand and a cell phone in the other, recording everything. I didn't need to see the face clearly. His murderous look and the posture in which he held the knife said it all. He was the hunter. I turned my back, but it was too late. The room door opened. He stood there. "You thought you were going to escape?" He didn't need to say it out loud. His eyes clearly conveyed his next intention. I knew I had to fight. I couldn't allow myself to become the next victim of this horrific performance. With all the desperation and fear suffocating my chest, I lunged straight at him. It was a reckless act, but it caught him off guard. When I slammed into him, he fell to the floor. The knife slid from his hand, bouncing several feet away. We wrestled in the darkness. He was strong, but I was fighting for my life, and I had no intention of giving up. He pinned me down, punching me like a beast. In that moment, I thought I had lost. But by some grace, I managed to land a direct punch to his left eye, causing him to stagger. I seized the opportunity, quickly rolled over and grabbed the knife. Without thinking, I aimed for him. He tried to dodge, but I managed to cut his forearm and ribs. He cried out in pain and fell to the floor, now covered in blood. I didn't stop. I stabbed the knife hard into his thigh so he couldn't follow me. He screamed like an animal. I didn't waste a single second. I ran at full speed toward the front door. I kicked and smashed the metal door with all my strength until the lock finally gave way. I burst out, rushing into the cold night. I ran and ran, my body exhausted, trying to fill my lungs with air. The feeling of real, imminent fear enveloped me. I ran until I felt I was far enough away. When I found an old public payphone, I stopped. Although my limbs were shaking and the guilt was heavy from what had happened, I called 911 when the police arrived. They found everything: the cameras, the tools, and the compartmentalized basement containing at least 6 people held captive. They were in deplorable conditions, with clear signs of torture. I had become the unwilling star of one of his gruesome shows. But what I learned that night was that sometimes desperation can become a weapon. That desperate move saved me from becoming just another victim. He was arrested, but I knew the story didn't end there. Others in that network were still free. They are still looking for other innocent people. Now I live in a state of perpetual alertness. Every night I check under my sleeping spot, looking through the broken windows. I never sleep a full night. Anxiety and fear haunt me always. I survived, but I am changed forever. The memory of that night is like a bad movie, one I will never forget, even if I wanted to. I was just a homeless man caught in a sick game of predation. And until those others are caught, I know they are still out there.